All right, so we're just beginning Precepts class number 7. And we just finished our 10 minutes of free writing, where the prompt was looking back through the first half of the year journey of Precepts. What do you feel like you have clarity about? And what is there still confusion about? Would anyone like to share any tidbits and see if others feel the same way or differently before we get into our precept? Clarity, confusion, all muddled together. Yes, Leslie.
So I've been doing a lot of things, including the Appomatto Intensive a couple weeks ago. So I feel like I'm getting pretty clear on, that it's giving myself permission to do nothing, be quiet, be silent, meditate. The part that I'm still cloudy that still keeps happening is what happens when I get triggered. And I'm getting better about getting triggered and getting having all the emotions, and sometimes I can slow down enough to anyway, but most of the time it'd be nice not to get triggered. So that's the part that I'm still talking
about. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could just for once and all banish the triggers?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else relate to that one? Yeah.
I'll or can I throw one in? Okay. So I'm coming to this as a serious study about adopting this path, right? And I also come from a background of religious trauma. So for me, I like what I hear, and I like the practice, and I love the Sangha, and it resonates with me in such profound ways. But I'm also afraid of, I guess, what I'm cloudy about. I mean, what I'm clear about is this is right. This makes sense. It doesn't just make sense here. It makes sense for me to be doing this practice. But I think what I'm cloudy about is, what is it that makes Buddhism and Zen Buddhism different in a way that that I can trust it. I don't know how to say it other than that. I mean, I know that people are people, and anytime you have people involved, there can always be some kind of shenanigans, right? But I mean, really, I don't want to go back into a religious or a spiritual space where there's, using the knowledge or the practice against one another, or diminishing other people, or marginalizing, or controlling, or any of that kind of stuff. And so that's the part that I'm still not clear enough about. And part of that is my own crap, right? Like, I know that even if everybody, like, even if I saw how it is, I probably wouldn't fully believe it, because I'm working through some of that. But is there anything different about this path that makes it less corruptible? And the answer can be no, and I can go back to therapy.
Yeah. I think it was Norman Fisher that says that, one byproduct of this practice is it makes denial impossible. Mm-hmm. Right? You can no longer fool yourself. So, humans are humans, and Zen centers have plenty of history of transgressions, even and especially in the United States. So there's a human issue, right, where the Sangha is composed of humans, and you're going to have good and bad actors. But I think we have a slight advantage in that, the process of meditation and the impact it has on the wiring of the brain makes it harder to fool oneself, to deny what you're doing and the impact you're having on the world. But obviously the transgressions prove that you can still do it. But that's the individual human. Looking at the practice and the religion of what's different, to me, what came to my mind is this is the only one I found that is not trying to get you to believe something. As a matter of fact, it's taking the opposite path. It's trying to get you to stop believing everything, to stop making new beliefs, and to tear down the ones you have, so that you're just stuck there in a groundless space of wonder and curiosity and open to what might happen. That's my answer. Clarity, cloudiness. Rosemary.
So I'm feeling clear in some of the previous precepts before the one we're talking about tonight. Treating people on equal ground. This was there was a lot for me to work on in this one, and
well, the holidays, make that one.
well, pretty, yeah.
Rich.
Then
We'll
and
call
just
it's rich and fruitful work.
actually, daily life shows me a lot about that in myself, and interestingly too, in terms of treating people on equal ground, I tend to idealize people, so that's lifting people up, which means I'm putting myself lower, which means by doing that, I'm not really following or the path of this precept. So equalizing, doing less idealizing and more, appreciating myself, equalizes that in terms of that precept too. So that feels clear. And the other one had to do with equal ground and treating people with openness and possibility. And I think I feel clear about that, trying to start with myself too, although that's harder, with everyone just at this moment, and that anything is possible going forward without thinking of, the history that I might have with that person. That's cloudiness is our current work tonight. And that, it's such a huge topic. And I did actually quite a bit of writing on it, but I don't think I feel any clearer in my relationship with sex. I ran up against my perfectionism and getting upset with myself about that. So just accept.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah, right.
I should know this.
I'm sorry, say that again, Todd.
I said, you're feeling you should know this. You should be clear already. Something wrong with you?
Yeah, that's a big one for me. And in general, just I should know, I should do, I should have it all together, and it trips me up all the time. So I don't know that there's a precept on that particular issue, but it's one of mine. And yes, and it hit me up with this one on sexuality. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, why don't we move on and get into it? Yeah, this one is speaking of rich and fruitful, right? This is one that I think most often is challenging as we go through the year. This is one of the most challenging ones. So I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. Respectfully and with an open heart. There's a long tradition in Buddhism and in Zen of addressing this, right? I mentioned the challenge in this precept. And part of that challenge is because of the primal, energetic nature of it. But that's also creates a great opportunity, right? Where else are we going to find such a primal and forceful example of greed and longing, right? And attachment. So it gives us plenty of ground to work, to see what we're doing, see how we're meeting these things and what we're up to. So if we start that way, like, oh, there's a lot here, this is going to be a useful one. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier. And there's a famous koan that kind of sums this up. It's mentioned in the book. Why can't the clear-eyed bodhisattva sever the red thread? The red thread in Zen is a euphemism for passion, desire, animalistic passion and desire, our human animal nature. Why can't the clear-eyed bodhisattvas sever the red thread? Clear-eyed, right? If we had clarity, if you could understand it, right? Then can it be cut off? Can't we rise above it? Not be affected by it? That's the timeless question. I'm going to read to you from John Tarrant from Bring Me the Rhinoceros. The idea here is that the red thread theme runs through everyone's life. The red thread is passion and sorrow, all the vulnerability and desire that link you to the world. The direction this thread takes in your life is only gradually observable over time. It is the color of blood, of fire, of sex, of intimacy. To connect, to help, to be of use in this world, you have to walk with people, right? You can't, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop here and interject myself. You can't cut yourself off in the world, right? You can't rise above it, or you could, right? But that's not the way. So going back to John, to connect, to help, to be of use in this world, you have to walk with people. You have to let them act upon you also, and you won't remain unchanged. Songyan, who made this koan, was explicit about this. Sometimes he said, it's the red thread between your legs.
Mm-hmm.
So Terrence pointing out that passion and desire are key ingredients to developing empathy for others. And that by contrast, those who invoke religious purity often end up missing the point. I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. Sexual desire can rattle our thoughts and emotions, right? We were talking about triggers there, Leslie, a few minutes ago, right? Well, this can be really triggering, right? You can get your whole nervous system, your whole body, pulse, blood pressure, everything activated. It's one of the most powerful energies we can experience. And from science, we know it originates in the hypothalamus, right? Our ancient reptilian brain, the same part that handles thirst and hunger, handles sexual desire. So fundamentally, anatomically, it's part of the basic survival mechanism of our animal nature, along with food and water, the desire to procreate, the desire for sexual union. It's fundamental. And here's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. The preservation of the species was a point of such necessity that nature had secured it at all hazards by immensely overloading the passion at the risk of perpetual crime and disorder. He's pointing out that it must be so important, such a basic necessity for us human beings to carry on, right, to populate, that nature secured it at all hazards, overloading the passion, even at the risk of perpetual crime and disorder that it causes. So what starts as a biochemical resonance that drives all of life gets processed by our more complex consciousness, and then is refracted through our brain, through our cultural conditioning, beliefs, all our ancient twisted karma, right? So it starts out as this basic biochemical process, but then it bangs and slams against our religious upbringings, what we've been admonished not to do or to do, what we believe about ourselves. And it's hard not to get all wrapped around the axle and confused about what to do with it. So it's one of the experiences we can have the most confusion about. It can be fraught with cultural opinions, with the same thing being viewed very differently, in the East and the West, with religious views about what it means, about what's allowable and what's not, our own beliefs and our own self-imposed restrictions. So this is one of the reasons why it shows up in the precepts and it shows up in these spiritual practices, is it's stressed for anyone hoping to cultivate a clear mind, right? What was the saying? I think it was Jack Kornfield's teacher that used to say, you think you're so enlightened, go home and visit your parents. I think of this in a similar way. You think you've cultivated a clear mind and you've risen above it, just get triggered by that sexual someone you have the longing for and see how clear you are. So it's rich. And depending on how we work with it, this biochemical reaction that starts can lead to deep intimacy, connection and union, or escapism, using the partner as an object to escape our daily life or our fears or thoughts, and like a drug. Or it can be used as an abuse, as a power play. All starts in the same part of the brain. So the one thing we know is if we are to have any hope of taking action with clarity and freedom, we must face passion. We must face it. We're not going to sever it. We're not going to rise above it. In monastic environments, this precept is often worded in such a way, here we're wording it as engaging respectfully and with an open heart, right? But often in monastic environments and many other religions, it's more of worded to encourage celibacy, right? As a restriction. Here, we're thinking about it as a way of meeting it respectfully and openly. We don't hope to quash it. We must investigate it and know it so we aren't confused by it. It's the same process as Joko's thought labeling and learning our own background conditioning in our own story making, the way we meet our experience. The better we are at recognizing our patterns, right? The less we're going to be caught by them and confused by them. And so we study this passion to see how it bubbles through us, how it triggers us. Going back to John Tarrant, desire burns at the core of life, and it's usually complicated. If you love me, then I don't love you, as Carmen sings. One spiritual solution to desire is to flee it. The idea is non-attachment, transcending the body and its feelings. An intellectual form of taking a cold shower. But trying not to think about what you want sets up an inner conflict and is not the same as freedom. Desire might be handled in another way, as a given. What you want is a portion of the world rising out of nothingness to meet you. It has its own purity just by existing. It's as real as the Sydney Opera House or a wombat. You can't transcend a wombat. Perhaps desire is necessary for
I'm
life.
sorry, Todd, the what? Can't
A
transcend.
A wombat. He's just bringing out two things out of real life. It's as real as Sydney Opera House or a wombat, the animal.
Oh.
Yeah. You can't transcend a wombat. Perhaps desire is necessary for life and fundamental to empathy. You might find freedom by going toward the disturbing force rather than away from it. There is nowhere outside the body you can live. So you might find freedom within the body. Right, so he's very clear, a similar admonition, a warning to not try and transcend it. I just had a thought of, and I like to tell you who says what or where they come from, but over the years, they're all just mixed together in my head. I think it was Barry Magin, who's one of Joko's heirs and a psychologist, psychotherapist, that says, the issue with transcending things, or the problem with it, is not that you can do it, it's that you can almost do it. Looks like you can. You think you can almost get there. But then when you can't, the fall's much higher, much higher. So perhaps we shouldn't even start. Let's not get on that wagon thinking we're just going to transcend things. Here's another expansion from Ken Jones. Typically, the self makes one or other of two kinds of response. On the one hand, it may seek gratification by a mindless immersion in desire. Right? Let's just go in, let's party, let's desire. On the other hand, in a common spiritual response, it may seek to repress desire, virtuously and righteously controlling it by means of ethical commandments and precepts enforced literally and absolutely. Tarrant observes that the red thread is always tangled and resists the simplification of life into formulae. Erotic connection turns life upside down. And when life is too tight, turning things upside down can be a good thing. This koan resists the totalitarian impulse in spiritual paths. Everyone has some sainthood possible, and the unfolding of their goodness might sometimes be through transgressions, through what is wild and imperfect in them. The point of this koan might be found in truly living your life rather than living it perfectly. So we're talking about our response to desire. Religious background about desire, right? The trap of transcendence or almost transcendence, and kind of the yin and yang, or the two poles of those. Run toward it, run away from it. Either way, there's no escape. Maybe we should just stop running. I don't know.
I've got a question, I guess. In the readings, I didn't hear, and clearly I could have missed it, but I was just looking for more acceptance of the red thread. And, you know, instead of putting it down or avoiding it, it seems like the Buddhist way to me is to accept it.
Yeah.
And deal with it. And the dealing with it is the hard thing, I think. But in reading it, I guess I didn't see a lot of the acceptance, and that's what again, my whole, I guess, theory of Buddhism and the precepts is you know, doing the right thing and accepting, you know, kind of accepting things and going from there. I don't know if I'm missing something or.
I don't think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying anything different. I think I'm emphasizing where we start, and that people often get caught in a false dichotomy that, you know, there's one of two choices to be made, and kind of trying to dissuade people from that idea that there's not a dualism here. And where it's going is it's going to be there. And so how do we start to accept it and start to work with it? So I think we're going the same place. I was just really emphasizing the false dichotomy that a lot of people don't ever get past, to start working with it. But I think you're right. I don't think there's as much talk about acceptance in this chapter, but I do think it's there. It maybe she's, you know, at this point in the book, kind of taking it for granted. But yeah, let's keep that in mind as we keep going, I think, and see if you start to hear it or not, and then we can discuss it. So here's an old koan about the old woman burning down the thatched roof hut. There was an old woman who oversaw the lodging and food of a spiritual hermit living high in the mountains near her cottage. Each day, she trekked up the mountain to bring him food and to see that he had what he needed to support his meditation. After many years of doing this, she decided it was time to test his understanding. So she sent her lovely young granddaughter this time to bring him his food. She also instructed the young woman to entice him by resting her head on his lap and to ask him, "How's this?" So one cold, rainy morning, the girl made her way up the mountain and entered the hermit's hut. She gave him his food and then rested her head on his lap, asking, "How's this?" The hermit jumped up and turned away quickly, expounding the words of a poem. "The withered tree is rooted in bitter cold. During these winter months, no heat rises, no life." He then pushed the girl out of the hut into the cold rain without even a cover. Returning to her grandmother's cottage, the girl relayed the hermit's behavior in the hut. The old woman exclaimed, "That good for nothing. To think I've supported him in his practice all these years, and this is the extent of his understanding. There's not even an ounce of compassion in him." The old woman traveled once more up the mountain and set fire to the hermit's hut, thus sending him down the mountain and into the world. This koan appears in tons of the books and collections. You'll hear that one a lot. And it keeps getting passed down as a warning, right? To try and quash your desire and deny its existence, and to be cold is not only denying yourself. He couldn't even meet the young woman where she was at. It doesn't mean he had to, act on it, but to have some compassion and sensitivity and humanity in what was in front of him, rather than just, an initial reactive belief system that thou shalt not. So we have to learn how to meet this. We have to, as Mitch was saying, accept that it's there and try and find some clarity about how we meet it in the world and how we meet it in ourselves. Engage with it out of greed or manipulation or power play or anger can result in suffering, devastating suffering that's been made much more visible and apparent in the last 3 or 4 years, right? With the societal movement to try and raise awareness to the damage that it does. And on the flip side, engaging it with honesty, sensitivity, and an open and giving heart can result in a deep intimacy, one that's not available in many other ways, a rare and deep intimacy. And so Diane Rossetto takes us into it more deeply by saying the way to work with this precept is not to determine the correct behavior in every situation. But it's an inquiry to inquire deeply into the ways to use this powerful energy. And one of the ways that she says is most useful to try and learn this is to start thinking about what misuse looks like, right? If we have trouble deciding what does the highest and best use look like, if that seems cloudy to us, well, let's talk about the opposite. What does misuse look like? So that's a key way we can discover this precept, is to explore what it might mean to misuse sexual intimacy. While true intimacy means standing openly with ourselves and others, misusing intimacy relates to separation. It always somehow comes back to relating to separating ourselves from the other. Whether that's simply thinking about what we want, what our needs are above anything else, creating a story which creates a separate self and the other as an object of our desire. She's asserting that most of the time, misusing intimacy somehow relates to separating ourselves from others. And that even in the most intimate embrace, even in the most intimate union, depending on its approach, it's possible to be distant and disconnected. Perhaps you're just performing an act with an object, one that you've coveted. So we need to look at the connection. We need to look at how we're defining self and other and object. Also, she says, anytime we use sexual energy to escape or alter our experience, our present mind state, we're avoiding life as it is. Anytime we use sexual energy to escape or alter our experience, that is our present mind state, we're avoiding life as it is. Right? If you're using it to try and change the way things are, that's a red flag. It's a warning. If we perceive ourselves as separate, this is a misuse of the energy. But working with this precept can help us understand our patterns of thinking and feeling related to sexual intimacy. So we need to put it into practice. We need to, as we've done with all the other precepts, go through the process of awareness, of deepening, engaging the observer. And that's where she's going with it. So I think you're right, Mitch. While she doesn't talk so explicitly about acceptance, her focus is on, well, it's there. What do we do with it? So we're gonna try and find our patterns of thinking and feeling related to this powerful energy. One that maybe we're using it to escape loneliness, or to distract, or to avoid numb feelings or bad feelings. And exactly one of the most common misuse that she talks about stems from the avoidance of loneliness. Whether engaging in sexual intimacy to feel connected, or whether postponing and avoiding it to avoid rejection. Right? Both of them are because of the false view of separation. Stephen Mitchell in the Tao Te Ching says, hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. If you don't see the self as self, what do you have to hope or fear? So that's not in the book. That just popped in my head, but it seems similar to me. You know, avoidance of loneliness to feel connected, or postponing, avoiding intimacy for fear of rejection. They're all somehow kind of bound up in because we're maybe a bit too self-concerned. That's the parallel that popped in my head. And the author, Diane, talks about, gives a specific example herself about her loneliness during her post-divorce and raising her children. And that as she studied it, she noticed how that for her, she wanted to fulfill this yearning to be wanted by someone who had to choose her. She was surrounded, she was lonely, but she was surrounded by her family, parents and children, but none of them chose her. They just had to be there. She had this yearning, wanted to be wanted by someone to choose her. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute before we talk about putting it in practice and give you guys a chance to reflect or see what you think. Opinions, confusions. Maybe I'm just tired of talking for a while and take a drink. Maybe I'll just regale. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask. So this is it's hard to really understand, I guess, if we're focusing on non-attachment, right? Like that, if a non-attachment is the practice, and yet this is something that this kind of intimacy like builds attachment, right, to at least one other person, right?
Mhm.
And so and often the progeny of that, right, that relationship, you're attached to them. So I mean, there is this kind of I mean, it's like we're making it harder for ourselves, right?
To
By
be unattached, you mean?
yeah,
Making it harder. Okay.
yeah,
I just want to make sure I understood where you're
yeah,
going.
yeah. So I mean, I totally get the idea that we don't want to, like, this is who we are, right? We're physical beings. We have this, it's innate. But to to confront this, and I don't mean confront it in a bad way. I mean to face this, to have it a part of who we are, and then also to be in relationship, with another person or other people. You like you're not going to get away from that unless you're doing it in the wrong way. You're not going to get away from that kind of intimacy without forming serious attachments.
Hmm.
So what's the right way of thinking about that?
Oh, well, I don't think our goal of our practice is to avoid attachments. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I know why you're saying that, because Buddhism talks about it kind of in that way, but I don't think that's how it's to be taken. We just don't want to get attached to our attachments. We want to hold them lightly, right? We want to see them clearly. Norman Fisher says, a good Buddhist practice, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember this stuff, but a good Buddhist practice, one that's rooted in the teachings, makes us much more human, not less so. One that can love and desire and cry and weep and wail with no confusion in it. Just love, just desire, just tears, just grief. And when it comes, it comes. In the Tao Te Ching, they describe the master, what a master looks like. Things arise, and she lets them come. Things disappear, and she lets them go. When her work's done, she forgets it. That's why it lasts forever. The attachment is in the attempt to, the negative attachment that you're referring to is in the attempt to grasp life, to solidify it, to stop it, to slow it down. No changing. Don't let it go away. Don't let the bad come. Right? It's not in living it, it's in resisting it.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking up, so I'm not the only one speaking. Yes, Rosemary.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciated your acknowledging this. It's a challenge to talk about and to grapple with. And I think for me, coming from a very Catholic background growing up, and a family, this wasn't, nobody was it was the 50s, nobody was discussing this. I don't think I've ever been in a group discussion about it. So ever. So thank you for saying it's a challenge. Validating my experience.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. So putting it into practice, where the rubber meets the road. So like we do with all the other practices of working with the precept, we begin with awareness. Begin with awareness of physical sensations. And specifically, in this precept, physical sensations of that sexual force, that sexual energy. We begin in the body. That's where we start. We start in the physical world. Okay, I was like, oh, I was putting a connection together, something that happened earlier. It was about what Leslie was saying at the very beginning about being triggered. Right? So it's like that. It's like the being triggered, where when you're triggered, where do you begin? You go all the way back to the physical world. That's where you spend your time. That's where you start when you're triggered. What does it feel like? What does my chest feel like? What does the blood flow in my head feel like? my stomach. So it's a similar kind of thing. I didn't get to say that earlier when you were talking about it, Leslie, but the practice, triggered practice, come back to the body, spend a lot of time in the body. And then it'll follow the same path we're going to go here, about starting in the body and then deepening and then going into thoughts, beliefs, and things, but same kind of thing. So we begin in the body. She, of course, invites you to sit quietly and still, to bring awareness to the body, to do a body scan. And then, like what would be called a probe in Hakomi, right? We're going to throw a little pebble into the pond. My dogs are coming and going. Throw a little pebble into the pond. So she instructs you to bring in an image, bring into image, any word, sense, or image that excites you sexually. And then notice immediately, do you judge that image, word, or thing as good or bad or indifferent? What judgments do you have about it? Notice any changes in the body, your respiration rate, pulse, blood flow, you feel flush, or maybe you feel nothing. Maybe you feel dead inside. Maybe you wonder why you don't feel anything. We're just noticing. We're bringing this non-judgmental awareness, the mind of the observer, to what happens. And then we deepen this body scan, progressing through various bodily areas, working from head to toe. Are there any parts that are different? Are there parts of your body that you can't feel, that are missing? And then continuing our awareness practice, moving from the body to notice any feelings we have, any fear or shame, anger or hurt. It's a process of inquiry. Its power isn't in judgment, but exactly because it does not have judgment as its goal. That's why it's useful, is because it does not have judgment as its goal. This awareness, this inquiring mind, seeks no answer. It is bare discovery. Bare discovery. And then as a result of this, we can bring into awareness what thoughts and beliefs we associate with sexual energy. We can start to see those judgments. Do we feel fear? Do we feel shame? What emotions come up? What thought reactions we have? That's step one, awareness of physical sensation. Step two, deepening the inquiry into daily life. We bring the same process of bare discovery, of non-judgmental mind and awareness into our daily experiences. What sorts of reactions do you have to different situations that might carry this energetic tone? As you see people on the street or the grocery store, attraction and aversion, judging mind. It brings out your personal experience with sexual energy. What attitudes and judgments do you hold towards yourself? What attitudes and judgments do you hold towards others? Perhaps you see someone in public that you find attractive and you immediately think, oh, I shouldn't be attracted to them. They're such a different age than me, or they're such a different whatever than me, race, color, creed. These probes, we bring we use daily life as our Hakami probe. It's dropping the pebble into our pond, every time we turn a corner. We try and notice what's up. What are we up to? In this process, give yourself permission to think and feel without judgment. We're looking for patterns of how you meet your experience. It's the work of exploring the ways in which we may use this energy to reinforce our patterns, our self-identity that cloud what actually is. This is Suzuki Roshi's idea of self. You like his books, you read his books. That phrase is throughout all of them, the idea of self. We can use this precept to see how we spin out the fantasy of a separate self by using sexual energy, right? When you see the other, that triggers that. What idea of self does it reinforce in you? Oh, I'm too old for them. I'm too XYZ now. So what are your thought reactionary patterns? How do you meet this energy? What's your ancient twisted karma? Your conditioning? Put simply, who do you think you are? And finally, in kind of the third phase or third step, we began to hopefully uncover our attitudes and core beliefs, as Joko would say. We began in the body, and then we engaged the observing mind to uncover what takes place in the mind around sexual energy. And then next, we deepen the inquiry to how our attitudes about sex can be used to reveal deeply held beliefs. So the questions you can ask yourself: what thought patterns do you notice? What emotional patterns do you notice? Do you connect sensuality with a specific thought or emotion? What beliefs or core beliefs about yourself or other might you have? Do you connect this with closeness? With power? Is it a power thing? Is it a status thing? With love? Do you connect it with safety? Who only knows? It's for you to discover. So that is engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. I like, Diane often has her students reword the precepts in their own words, however they like. And part of that, for those who are interested in doing the precept ceremony for basically form at the end of this process, we'll talk about it more as we get closer. It's voluntary. But for those who want to go through a ceremonial way of saying, yes, this is what I want to try and do, we do the same thing. We'll ask you to, before you go through that process, to write these precepts in your own terms and what it means for you. And here's one that's in the book that she put in from one of her students about this precept. I take up the way of stepping into sexual intimacy, not only naked in body, but in heart. I take up the way of meeting the craving as well as the fear of the craving, the desire for closeness as well as the fear of closeness, the greed for power as well as the fear of power, the escape as well as the union. Any thoughts or reflections about this precept? Any questions or things that are bubbling around?
So I have something that's sort of come up. And I'm reluctant to bring it up at all, but I started thinking about it when you mentioned that this is initiated in the hypothalamus. And I believe that to be the case when I conjure an image of something I find attractive or alluring. But I've also had the experience, for instance, when I'm in an embodied state and I encounter another person, typically in close physical proximity, but not necessarily. I mean, if I'm doing meta for someone across the country, sometimes that their energy resonates, and you get like an energetic read, for lack of a better word, or interconnection, which usually takes place in the heart or the solar plexus or something. But I've also had the experience of an energetic read on people in a way that I would define as sexual. And I'm curious as to whether this happens to other people. And I don't question whether I've got thoughts and judgments in reaction to that. But it's kind of a surreal experience, and I couldn't not mention it.
Well, I, for one, have to just admit that I don't think I understand what you're talking about. So I'm not sure I can answer. But maybe others are following you and have that experience.
Yeah, for sure. And what's really interesting is it isn't even like, it can be somebody that I know, it could be somebody that I just see, and it's not everybody. And there's no apparent rhyme or reason. It's not like there's a type. It's not like there's a gender. It's not like there's anything. There's just certain people. Then suddenly I'm like, I have this reaction to. And I have often wondered about it. And I'm like, where is that coming from? And why am I having that reaction? And sometimes I feel like it may be reciprocated. Other times I feel like they're completely clueless. I don't know. But I have had a similar, I don't know if it's the same thing, but a similar kind of experience. And I don't know. I always just say, oh, I must have known them in a past life or something, because why else would I just have this reaction, right, to a person that I, in some cases, don't know, or in other cases, I'm not even close to interested to pursuing anything up here. Like I don't want to be in any relationship with that person, but there's this energy there. Yep.
And thank you for actually speaking about it, Heather. Appreciate it. Mitch unmuted here. I was waiting to see. You're going to say something. If not, Rosemary's ready.
I was going to say something. Sometimes I get that same feeling. It's just looking at somebody and seeing, I don't know, just getting aroused by seeing someone. I think. I don't. And for me, the problem is communicating with that person, and not, for me, it's I guess becoming aware of it. And I guess in the past, it would be trying either to make a connection or avoiding it altogether, or running away from it. And I guess trying to understand the precepts again, in addressing it, I guess at this point, I just want to accept it, that it's there. And I don't want to run away from it anymore. I don't necessarily want to take any action either, I don't think, but I don't want to put a judgment on it, I don't think. And I think that's what I've done in the past is get that feeling and then judge it. And I may judge the person, I'll judge myself. And I think that's something that I guess I have to deal with, but also it's just another way to, I think maybe hopefully this is going to provide me another way to look at it and accept it. I'm done.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you. Rosemary?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the observations that Diane was recommending, and all of the, it was seeking no answer. That's the big challenge for me. Is not to be looking for what it means, or just stopping at the observation for now anyway. Right. And because it seems like this precept, and probably all of them, will be seeping into us for a long time. And I was just talking to one of our other Sangha members, Maria, in the UK, and in what they stay in this precepts group year after year after year, continuing to look at them. And that also felt very reassuring, because the idea, I know that we're doing this in 10 months or 12. It doesn't mean that, okay, you've got it, and it's, but, I might put that on myself, to get it in 10 months or 12 months or whatever. But anyway, yes, seeking no answer. That's practice edge, I guess.
We've always done the same thing here at Appamada in Austin about the continuation of the precepts. Before we did the generosity model, there was a sizable fee to do this, but once you signed up, you were invited back every year. And many people take it a few times, or they'll take it one time and then they'll come back a couple years later. And so it is a process that takes some time. Well, that's not a good way to put it. It'd be better to say that it always yields more fruit, even if you think the tree's been picked.
Because we change.
Right. Our understanding changes and our brain changes as we continue to sit, and what we can observe becomes better. Our ability to go through it becomes deeper. Okay, one last thing and then we're wrapping up. So, given that it is mid-year, part of our process is going through the learning record. So hopefully you haven't forgotten completely about the learning record, right? And that hopefully every month you're trying to make these observations of what you're experiencing in life and how you're meeting it. And part of the learning record, and we haven't looked at it for a while, but there is these part B1 and C1. So these are to be completed halfway through the course. And we're just about there. This is a good time for you guys over the next week or two to do part B1 and C1. These are opportunities to take stock. So you go back and you review all the evidence so far, the evidence being the observations that you've made, the detailed observations you've made in the work samples. And then in part B1, there's a little process to try and interpret it, to try and see what you interpret, what you've made of the first 6 months of your observations and your learnings. And that's done in the terms of the dimensions of the way of awakening, which are the end of the learning record. If you've forgotten what those are, there's dimensions of awakening. So you can use those as your prompts to try and help you interpret what you're seeing. And the aspirations for learning in part C1 that you, as you express them at the beginning of the course. So this won't take you long, might be good to take half an hour or 40 minutes at some point in the next week or two and go back and take stock. This is why we do the learning record. It's because we tend to forget all the little observations that we've made, little insights that we've had, and think they amount to nothing. But if you go back and see the arc of them, you might have a different feeling. And if you haven't been doing many observations, then this is a good time to realize that, you still have halfway to go. And if you make the observations on the second half, you'll get to see the second half of the arc. So that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us and for your willingness to engage in this uncomfortable and challenging topic. You're speaking up and you're offering your reflections, I know is so helpful to everyone else. And it really makes the process. So thank you for your willingness and your courage. I think this is the hardest one. So if you survive this one, you'll probably survive the rest of them. All right. Good night, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.